I hope you can all hear me okay with this microphone. I'll stay seated. If I stand up, I'll start to maybe sound like a teacher, and that's maybe not what we want right now. But good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the launch of Tomb of Empires by our very own Mr. Rehan Khan. My name is Neil, and I'm going to be having a lovely conversation with Rehan in just a few minutes. And after that, you'll get a chance to ask him all your burning questions about the book, about pre-Christianity, I suppose, Arabia, the craft of writing, or anything else you might want to ask him. So prepare your questions now. We'll do that a little bit later on. After that, we're going to head back downstairs. I know many of you have already bought your books and maybe even got them signed. But we'll head back downstairs after that. And if you want to buy your book in advance, we'll have a QR code up here at the very end. So you can buy in advance. If you want to pay cash, you can also do that downstairs, no problem. Just to keep things moving a little bit quicker, and so you're not having to wait around for quite so long. I'll let everybody get seated. Before we get started properly, I'd like to say a couple of thank yous. The first is to Safford British School for allowing us to hold the event here today. I think my kids are particularly happy about it because there's an excellent ice cream shop about 3 minutes away, and they'll probably remind me about that later on. Secondly, and very importantly, a very big thank you and a congratulations to Mehnaz and Sadia of Uhib, the publishers of Tomb of Empires. So I think we should give them a huge round of applause because they've worked tirelessly to bring this book to life, and many other books. And I'm sure that Rehan will testify they do it with true ihsan, with true excellence. So thank you to both of you. And you can probably see up here there's some hashtags and @. So please go ahead and follow Uhib and follow Rehan. And speaking of ihsan, some atmosphere, less atmosphere. But speaking of ihsan, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a man who exudes it, Rehan Khan. Many of you will know him through his Ottoman series, which you can see up here. The first of which, Tudor Turk, was actually nominated, as you can see, for a Carnegie Medal. There's also A King's Armour and A Demon's Touch. Tomb of Empires is actually his 7th book. And lucky for us, it won't be long before his 8th book is out. But as I say, that's a story for another time. As well as writing, Rehan is a teacher, a thought leader, and an advisor in AI and the future of work, and is a visiting professor at Hult International Business School. As well, and he works with executives across the region and across industries to help improve their focus, moral perspective, and strategic thinking. So he's a man of many talents, and it's a privilege to have him here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome once again, Rehan Khan. Let's get started. Rehan, we're hopefully going to have enough time to cover a few things to do with Tomb of Empires this afternoon. But in order to do that, I think you need to set the scene for us. I'm going to click one more this way. We have a beautiful map here, which is also in the book, you may have seen. It's set primarily on the Arabian Peninsula in the year 90 BC, which, as you say in your author's note, feels like a very long time ago, but in many ways, things today remain the same. So please, Rehan, to start us off, could you give us a sense of what that part of the world was like at that time?
Thank you, Neil. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome. Really appreciate you guys coming out on a Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much. And also a big thanks to the publishers, Sadia and Mehnaz from Uhib Books. So yes, in terms of the world, I mean, the map that you look at there, you can probably recognize all the contours, but some of the names are probably a little bit unfamiliar. Some of the names might sound a little bit Greek, some of them might sound Latin, and they are. But some of the names on there are definitely going to be familiar to you as well. I guess if I could get a show of hands, on there it says Seleucid Empire. Has anyone heard of the Seleucid Empire? There's a few of you have, but not many. And if I said the Ptolemaic Empire, yeah, a few. And if I say the Roman Empire, probably, yeah, everyone's like, exactly, yeah. That's the point. But the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic Empire, Neil, these were actually empires in the region for about 250 years. Now, by this time in 90 BC, the Seleucid Empire had actually shrunk a little bit more, but for the purpose of the story, I kept it a little bit expansive. But the Seleucid Empire really was controlling land from Turkey all the way to Afghanistan. On the map it shows A Khanun towards the top right. And that's a huge expanse of land across a big part of the world that we live in. But when I talk to people in the region, no one's heard of the Seleucid Empire. And yet if you go to Kuwait, off the coast of Kuwait, on the map you can see it says the Falika Island. There's actually a temple of the Seleucids where they would come and consult the oracle off the coast of Kuwait. So next time you're in Kuwait, go to the Falika Island and you'll see there's a temple of that the emperor would come and consult the oracle. So these were the two kind of big empires. And why did they exist? Well, before this time, of course, the region is very much shaped by the conquests of Alexander the Great, right? The Macedonian ruler who swept from Macedonia and Greece all the way through to India. And two of his generals, one was called Seleucus and the other one was called Ptolemy. So when Alexander dies very young, they then set up those two empires. And for several hundred years, they're kind of battling it out with each other. They're fighting with each other. And so the story really takes place in the aftermath of one of these battles between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. Now, the other name that's on there, which I'm sure probably most of you have heard of, which is the Nabateans, right? If you've been to Petra in Jordan or Medina Hegra in Saudi Arabia, you'd have heard of the Nabateans. So the Nabateans are also there. Now, the Nabateans are quite interesting because, in terms of who they are, the Nabateans, one theory is that they claim descent from Nabioth, who was basically the eldest son of Prophet Ishmael, who was the son of Prophet Abraham. That's a theory. It's not entirely proven, but quite possibly the Nabateans came from that line. But around this time in 90 BC, the Nabateans were controlling the spice routes. So the spice would come into Aden, which you can see at the bottom of the map, which is today in Yemen, and also Mocha. So for all of you who are coffee drinkers, obviously Mocha is familiar. And 1,000 years after this time, Mocha was, of course, the global center of all coffee, because that's where the Arabica coffee comes from. But that's for another day, not for today. So the Nabateans controlled the spice routes. They would take the spice from Aden and Mocha, and they would take the spice up to Gaza or to Gaza, and from there the spice would go across the region. So the story is set really around how one of those empires, the Seleucid Empire, its treasury is very low, and it wants to get access to finance quickly, so it decides to attack the spice routes that belong to the Nabateans. So that kind of gives you a bit of a sense of what the region was like at the time.
Thank you, Rehan. I think Rehan's also available for history talks, I imagine. Well, there's a very intimate feel to the world that you've created, despite it feeling so long ago. How did you manage to do that? Did you do a lot of research on the ground, or was it a lot of just book learning? How did you manage to bring that to life and make it feel like it was that we're there with these people and make it feel quite contemporary?
Yeah, I guess some elements, if you think about like today, all of us, things that are familiar to us are like global trade, right? Global trade is familiar to us. At this time, southern Arabia, which is Yemen, the Greeks used to call this area Arabia Felix, and Felix in the Greek meaning happy, meaning pleasure, and it was a place where the very southern tip of Arabia. The name the Greeks gave it was Eudaimon. And Eudaimon, if you've read Aristotle talks about human flourishing, and he talks about happiness, which is Eudaimon. So actually, southern Arabia was called Eudaimon. It was the place of human flourishing. Why? Because it was the land of frankincense, it was the land of myrrh, it was the land of cinnamon, it was the land of spices, and its people were just like incredible people. And so, everyone recognized that. So when you write about trade, which I'm writing about in this book, obviously there are trade routes and so on. And then, so for a contemporary reader, you feel, oh, I understand that. I understand these guys are in commerce, and they're linked to the Chinese trade, which is coming from the east, from the eastern side. So suddenly you then feel like you've entered a world that you're familiar with, right? And so I guess that's part of it, sort of trying to figure out, what is familiar today, that will connect with what's familiar in the story as well.
As you can see, we've just changed slightly the image behind you, Rehan, of pictures of you there. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences, getting to know the places a bit more intimately?
Yeah, no, I guess, and I guess what I should say is something maybe just to circle back on one of the questions about the research, which maybe I didn't answer. When you're writing historical fiction, then academic research is actually important, right? So for the Ottoman books that I wrote before, I read like one or two books on the history of the Ottomans to give me a sense. For this book, because I was writing about so many different types of civilizations, I ended up reading about 8, 9 academic books on the Seleucids, on the Ptolemaic Empire, Nabateans, and others. And when you start reading about these books, really interesting things start to pop up. So the Seleucid Empire, it was known as they were known as the Elephant Lords. Now you're probably thinking, hang on a second, this is a Greek Macedonian empire. There's no elephants, right? Elephants are in India, and elephants are in Africa. So why would they be called the Elephant Lords? So, and this is part of the research that you do. So I went back and I realized that actually in 300 BC, a bit before this time, 300 BC, the Greek armies, they were in the Hindu Kush, which today is kind of the Afghanistan area. They'd gone to the Hindu Kush and they went to the very extreme east as far as they were concerned. And there, in around 300 BC, they met the great armies of the Mauryan Empire of India, because the Mauryans ruled India, and of course Chandragupta Maurya is one of the great emperors of India. And so the Mauryans come from the west to fend off the Greeks. The Greeks come from the east. They meet in the Hindu Kush. The academic works say that there were probably about 500,000 troops on both sides. Now, of course, that might just mean 50,000, not 500,000. It means there was a big number, right? So there's about 500,000 from either side. And they kind of weigh each other up, and they realize this is going to be pretty bloody, so they decide to call a truce. And then there are some marriage alliances. Some Greeks married the Indians married the Greeks. And as a gift, what Chandragupta Maurya, what he does, he gives elephants to the Greeks. Some records say they gave about 900 elephants. Some say they gave 9,000 elephants, right? So elephants were given. And then these elephants, of course, then get trained into the Greek armies. So probably most of you may have heard of General Hannibal, who leads the elephants across the Alps to attack the Romans in 218. Where did those elephants come from? They came from the Seleucids, because Hannibal was an ally of the Seleucids. And you can see on the map up there's a place called Mount Karasis, if you look around Turkey. So in Turkey, Mount Karasis was actually the elephant training center for war elephants. That's where they would train the war elephants. So they took these war elephants, Hannibal takes them, crosses the Alps, attacks the Romans, and then around 165 BC, the Seleucids take elephants, and that's when they sack Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is sacked in around 165 BC by the Seleucid forces. And they use elephants to do that. And of course, after that, you then have something called the Maccabean Revolt, which is also mentioned in the Bible as well. So elephants are used. So you come across all of those things. So when you start reading about all of that, to get back to the second question you asked there, about some of the places, when you start going to some of these places, you kind of start looking out for all those things, right? So in Jordan, many of you have probably been to Petra, right? So Petra is very, very famous. And who has actually been to Petra here? Yeah, a lot of you have been to Petra, great. But who's been to Bosra and Sela, which is right next to Petra? No? Oh, no, okay, maybe. So no one's been to Bosra and Sela. So basically, this would be like going to somewhere like Dubai and not going to Abu Dhabi, or going to London but not going to Milton Keynes or something next to it. It's so close. And Bosra and Sela were like the second cities of the Nabateans. So Petra was a significant city, Bosra was a significant city, and Sela. So we went up there, and Faiza, myself, and the kids, and my mum as well, and we had a driver, and we said to the driver, yeah, we want to go to Sela, we want to go to Bosra, and his driver's like, there's nothing there. Like, he's a tourist, like he drives people, that's his day job, and he drives tourists around. And we're like, no, trust me, there's something there. And he's like, there's nothing there. It's like a 2-hour drive up this mountain. And we get there, and of course there's something there. And then the driver is like, whoa, I didn't know this existed, right? So that is Sela and Bosra. So again, you go to these places, and they're places of great antiquity. There's a great reverence there because, people lived there, there was trade, right? So, but it's still there. So I guess that's also part of the excitement of when you go on these kind of tours and you look around. Sorry, I answered
That's
your
right.
question very
No, I know
long-winded
you
way.
can do an hour's worth of this, so I will stop you if it gets a bit too long. But the setting and the landscape and the people who were there is one thing. But what I'd love to know is, why did you want to write this book about these people in this place at this time? Because I think you were writing initially something completely different.
Yes, exactly. So I was actually, and as some of you will know, my parents are from India, and so I was actually writing a book, Neil, on that was set in the 19th century in India. I won't reveal what it's about because I'll save that for another day. So, and then I was halfway into the research, and then a friend of mine who is a friend of mine in the region, he said to me, Rehan, you've lived for 20 years in the Middle East, yeah, and you write these stories about the Ottomans, but why didn't you write something about the Arabs? I thought, it's actually got a point, really. I've been living here for 20 years. Surely I should be writing about the Arabs as well. And that really got me thinking then, okay, well, what am I going to write? Because I didn't want to choose some of the kind of more well-known characters like Salahuddin, because I think other people can write that much better than I can write it. And I didn't want to choose a time which is maybe, had been overdone a little bit. Yeah. So I kept going back in time, and I ended up going back pre-Christianity, pre-Islam, to a point which it felt very contemporary to me. And hence I then, decided on 90 BC. So that was the reason why I guess I switched from what I was doing to what I ended up doing.
What about purpose?
Yeah, now purpose is an interesting one because why people ask you, why do you write stories? And, as what I would say is, look, I think if you look at the great works of literature, and of course for writers like me, kind of average writers, looking at great works of literature is like a gold standard, right? So when you read something like Jane Austen or Charles Darwin or Charles Dickens, forgive me, or if you read Dostoevsky, these are like the gold standard. And those kind of books that are the kind of gold standard, they're written like at 4 levels. Like great literature is written at 4 levels. You've got the kind of literal level, the plot, what happened, action, whatever. And that if you read the Iliad, for example, you can read the Iliad just at the plot level, like what happened. Then you've got the kind of allegorical level. The allegorical level is like, what is the author really saying? So if you read Animal Farm is what it's about, some animals who rebel, but what's it really about? It's about the Russian Revolution, right? So that's the allegorical level. Then you've got the next layer down of a great novel, which is the moral level. What is morality? Morality is really about, what should I do? In this situation, what should I do? Whereas virtue is much more about, what kind of person do I want to be, right? So morality is very much, what should I do now? So you read a book like Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, it's full of kind of, very didactic kind of commentary on morality, and it's a great novel. Or the lowest level you could go to, or the highest level you could go to, I guess, is the kind of, in a novel, is like the spiritual level. So if you read something like The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, it's a great Russian work. And what's it about? It's about basically the fact that you should forgive people, right? When people make mistakes, just forgive them, right? Don't hold a grudge. And it's a very spiritual novel. There are great spiritual discussions within that. So for a very kind of just run-of-the-mill writer for me, looking at those great novels, that's the gold standard, right? So then if I can write something like that, which at a literal level might be, yes, it's a story of heroic action and so on. At an allegorical level, yes, it's a contemporary story because it's about 2 Western powers vying for resources in the Middle East, which kind of sounds familiar, right? So that's the kind of allegorical kind of element there. That what am I not saying, but I'm actually saying it. And then the kind of the moral level is, of course, then you put your characters in difficult situations and they have to deal with that. And then the spiritual level then is, the book is really about how can I know God? Yeah. So in Arabic, you would say like arif or marifa, how can I know God? And that's the kind of the spiritual. Now, whether I've achieved that or not, I don't know. I set out to do that as a purpose in the book. Obviously, you have to read it and tell me, no, Rehan, I didn't get any of that. I just got it. It was a great action. People died. Move on. Next one.
Well, I know where I stand on that. I think you've hit the mark, definitely. All right, let's get into the book a little bit more and talk about the characters. And we've got some beautiful illustrations of the characters. In fact, we've got another couple here, but we'll go back to these guys. There's a really rich array of characters in Tomb of Empires. They're the people who are the vehicle for telling this story about knowing God. But how do they do that? How do they carry that story that you wanted to tell?
Yeah, so look, when you there are kind of two ways to write characters in a novel. One is you can invest a lot of time building characters and then thinking, okay, I've built these characters up. Now, what dramatic function will they perform in the story? Will someone be an antagonist? Will someone be a protagonist? Will someone be a helper? And so on. So that's one way of creating characters. The way and that's totally fine, and if that's your style, do that. The way I prefer to build the characters and work out their purpose is really, I first design the setting, like where is the story taking place? What's the structure of the story, okay? I then decide the dramatic function, like what do I need a character to do, okay? Oh, I need a character to perform, in this kind of function. It could be an antagonist or a protagonist, or it could be a dark father or a light father, or whatever it might be. And then I start working the characters up, right? So kind of my approach to building the cast, because ultimately when you're writing a novel, it's like a film, right? You have to build the cast. You've got your primary characters, and then you've got your secondary characters around your primary characters. And then every character has to serve a dramatic function. Otherwise, they're just window dressing. Like, why are they in the book, right? It has to serve a function. So I tend to start like that, Neil. From a planning perspective, I look, what dramatic function will it serve? And then let me build a character.
Brilliant. And by the way, full disclosure, I was on Rehan's writing course, and you're getting a really nice sneak peek into some of the topics that he covers in his course. So I very much urge any aspiring writers to go ahead and join Rehan on that course. But for now, I'd like to focus on Zayn, who is up here, who's all intents and purposes the hero of the book, or at least one of the heroes. I think it's safe to say that everyone who has read the book already really loves Zayn. But what were the challenges in writing a character that's so good, but not making him bland or boring or run of the mill?
Yeah, look, so of course, if the character is generally a character who starts a novel with a sense of generosity and is very magnanimous and is kind, then of course what you need to do is you need to put the character under pressure, right? You need to test how generous they are. You need to test how, humble they are, etc. And so poor old Zayn in the book, his life is torrid because his brothers are trying to kill him. The other armies are trying to get to him, and it's really building a character like that, putting him under intense pressure, because that's when you really find out what someone's like, I think we all know that from experiences in life, when people, when everything is very easy, people can be very nice, right? But when the going gets tough and times are difficult, then sometimes, people's real character comes out then. So that's what you do with some of these characters as well. You put someone like Zayn, who is a heroic character, and you put intense pressure on them, and then see how they're going to react. Yeah, will they stay true to their character, or will they not? Right. So that I won't give any spoilers about what happens in the book, but that's really, I think that's how you deal with a character like that.
Thank you very much. And how about Apollonia, who is over here as well? And she's got so much inner strength. And anyone that's read the Ottoman series will know that you're no stranger to writing strong female characters. Is that something that you intentionally set out to do? Or is it really a byproduct, let's say, of being surrounded by such strong women in your life, looking for a fighter?
Of course, that helps, right? So yes, of course, that helps. But I think also, if you look like historically in this part of the world, and you look at the biographies of scholars, certainly in the East, there's always been women scholars, in all the traditions. In all of the traditions, you go back, you'll see the name of women. Women have always been scholars, okay? If you look at, for example, the great university Al-Qarawin in Fez in Morocco, it was financed by a Muslim businesswoman, right? You look at the very first mosque that was built, first or second mosque that was built in the United Kingdom, in Woking, which is where we have our house. That was financed by a Muslim businesswoman, the Begum of Bhopal, right? So, certainly people in the East are, it's not like unfamiliar for us to have women who are leading figures in every area. But of course, what happens, in the kind of the 18th century, 19th century, as the colonial powers start to come to the East, they bring their patriarchal system and they kind of impose that very much. So property rights and other things are just taken away, right? So that wasn't necessarily the tradition that was here. So all I'm trying to do in the novels, I'm just trying to reflect what actually would have been, something like that. So to me, writing the strong female characters is just a reflection of reality, really.
We've got a couple more characters up here, and this is my guy, my personal favorite character, Chow. He's a Han explorer. Oh, is this still on?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. A Han explorer and representative of the Han Emperor.
Okay.
All right, we'll do this the old-fashioned way, passing it back to each other. The elephant in the room is, what is he doing in the Arab world at that time, and what's he doing in the book?
Yep, okay. Just get out the microphone. Great, yes, of course. So what is a Han Chinese explorer doing in Arabia? Okay, so basically Chow in the story, he's the grandson of Xixin Zhang, which I'm sure I pronounced it wrong, and Dr. Yusuf Chai, who's a Zhang. Okay, exactly. I knew he was there. He came for a reason to get my pronunciation correct. And he is a scholar himself, a professor as well. And so basically, he's the grandson of this great Chinese explorer who came to Bactria, which is Afghanistan, in 165 BC. So his grandfather Zhang was actually he's one of the pioneers of the Silk Roads. There's a national museum in China named after him. He essentially is like the Ibn Battuta of this part of the world. He is like the Marco Polo of the Western world, like a really, really significant figure. So of course, I've taken some artistic license, right, to create a grandson of that great explorer, and then, to say that he was journeying towards the Middle Sea, the Mediterranean, the Middle Sea, right? So that's why he's in the story. So that definitely is kind of is fiction. There wasn't a Chinese character, not that we know of, that was in Petra in 90 BC. But certainly his grandfather was a very significant figure. And so I used a little bit of artistic license there.
Wonderful, thank you. And did you have a favorite character to write?
So there are about 35 characters in the book, and that's the full cast, I think, of the characters who I wrote some level of biography on. There are maybe 5 or 6, obviously, the main characters, because you can't follow 35 characters, right? So there are 5, 6 kind of main characters. So of those 5, 6 main characters, I think the one that's really kind of my favorite is a character called Pelagios. And Pelagios is very much kind of like a figure a little bit like Odysseus from the Iliad. This guy is like, he's a king, but he's not like a major king. He's like a king of a minor island, right? And so all the kings of the major islands, they all keep stepping on him all the time. And he has to keep on bowing to them. And the poor guy is just trying to look after his family. He's just trying to live a peaceful life. And everyone is just giving him a lot of grief, especially the Romans, right, in the book. So I just liked his character because it was just reminded me of like a middle manager in a corporation. Like the guy just wants like an easy life. And the executives are always like bothering him, do this, do that. And it just like felt something that I could really relate to. So I think that, having been a person like that, so I think a lot of you will probably really relate to Pelagios as well. Yeah, he's my guy,
I mean, there is definitely a little bit of comic relief in there, whether it's intentional or not. But yeah, it's. I feel for the guy. Just a couple more questions, Rehan, and then we can open up to questions. During the book, there are some really suspenseful, heart-stopping scenes, especially the siege of Petra. We don't want to give spoilers away, but can you talk to us a little bit about how it was to write those scenes? Because, I mean, they're really well-paced and you can't put the book down during those moments, but how did you manage to kind of keep that tension and keep that suspense going?
Yeah, I mean, look, the best thing when you're writing a novel, I tend to write novels based on like 3 acts, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, which is kind of a technique that's used from the film industry. And so, you take the acts, okay, what's going to generally happen in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And, like movies are always about the last act, right? You'll remember a great movie because it ends on a wow, what an ending, right? And books are very much like that as well. So you really need to crank the tension, to really crank the tension as you go. So then you look at the acts, you look at the chapters, and you think, okay, how do I pace the chapters? Okay, maybe it's going to be it's going to be a bit quick, then we're going to slow down, then we're going to speed up. So it's almost like having a graph, and on the graph plotting your story and seeing the pacing. Oh, it's getting a bit slow here, I need to crank the tension up. Oh, this is happening, I need to do such and such, So basically you kind of plot the acts, you plot the chapters out, and then you break the book down into kind of sequences. And you think, okay, like the Siege of Petra takes place over several chapters. So it's kind of like a long kind of sequence, okay, into the story. And so that's how you kind of build it. So, you kind of build it in that way. And I kind of do a lot of planning when I'm writing the stories. So, and that just allows you then to take like a helicopter view of the novel and then sort of dive down accordingly.
Thank you. Okay, last question. It's a big one. You've already explained that the book's primarily about how do you know God and knowing God. But why does this topic matter so much? And why do you want to write about this in particular?
Yeah, okay, well, look, so I think if you look at the great Russian novelist, Leo Tolstoy, okay, has anyone read Tolstoy here? Yeah, some of you have. Tolstoy's last book that he wrote was called, last work of nonfiction, was called What is Art? Has anyone read that one? Yeah, okay, What is Art? And Tolstoy led a very kind of bohemian life, but towards the end of his life, he became very pious, he became a very pious Christian. And in the book, What is Art? What he writes about, he says that, look, really the role of the artist is very much, because in his time in the 19th century, he's saying artists today are all about, getting followers. Like he's using his language in his time. It's all about getting followers. It's all about getting famous. I want everyone to know me. And he said artists are just trying to make money and they're just all full of themselves. And I was reading it and I was thinking, well, it sounds very contemporary, right? And but he says that's not the role of art. Okay. So Tolstoy says that's not the role of art. He said the role of art is to know God. It's to get close to God. Okay. And then when I was reading that, it really got me thinking about that. And I think, well, actually, a lot of the art, if you look traditionally, whether it was in the Christian world, you look at the great cathedrals, you look at the paintings, or whether it was in the Muslim world, in terms of the art, in terms of the mosques and the museums, etc., they were very much there about helping you to kind of know God as well. And so that's why I was kind of I was taking Tolstoy's lead to some extent in terms of the story about, what is art. And so my role as an artist or someone who's a painter, why are we performing our art? Are we doing it because we want to be famous? Are we doing it for followers? Which seems quite shallow, really, yeah. But then actually, no, there is a higher purpose, which is to know God. And certainly in our tradition, one of the ways, and this kind of plays out in the story, one of the ways to get to know God is through his divine names. And certainly in the Muslim tradition, God has 99 names. Well, there are more, but 99 that we know of. And so the way to know God is to manifest those names in your heart. So those names of being gracious or being merciful, okay? So how can I bring that into my heart? How can I imbue that into my character? And so when you're building the story in this way, it's about often putting the characters into very difficult situations. And so the way to know God is not to think, okay, is he transcendent, or is he immanent, is he far away, or is he close by? Actually, the way to know God is to actually bring those attributes to your heart. And that then starts to so that's kind of one way within the story I try and explore that. Whether I succeeded or not is not a matter, but that's certainly what sort of the underlying theme within the book.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much, Rehan. Now, before we give you a rapturous round of applause and go and get our books signed downstairs. We do have some time for questions. So if anybody would like to ask Rehan anything about this book, or others, I suppose, or anything in life in general, he's a very good counsellor, then please go ahead and raise your hand and we'll try and come over to you. I think maybe if the other microphone is not working, I'm going to have to do mine. Oh. So I think... All right, yeah, you have a nice big voice.
So one of the hallmarks of your craft or style is a lot of meticulous planning, right? So I'm just curious as to what extent after you've created this new world and you have your plan and then you start actually writing it and you're in it, there is some serendipity or some things change along the way. And is there an example of that might have happened in this book, or are you kind of like you stick to script?
Yeah, no, great. Well, from someone who's a great entrepreneur, you'll know that things never stick to plan, right? So you always end up deviating from the plan. But it's good to have a plan. Now, some writers, people like Stephen King, they say they don't plan. They just kind of write as they go along and see how things work out. But I'm guessing those of you who are writers or who are aspiring writers, you probably have a day job like me as well. So you don't actually have much time to write. So if I'm just kind of trying to just rely on what comes next, I'll probably spend a lot of wasted time. So that's why some planning is involved. So yes, Mohammed, I kind of plan my novels with great detail, but often then when I get to a scene, maybe the character was going to turn right, and I make them turn left instead. Yeah. So I always leave flexibility open because you need time for that, serendipity, just that intuition sometimes, and also. Often when you take a journey, you make the intention to take the journey, but you don't know the destination. And as you're taking the journey, the destination becomes apparent. So writing the novel is a little bit like that as well.
So I have a second question.
From the missus of Mohammed.
Although our different parts of the audience. So we live in a time that is very much characterized by, let's call it, short attention spans, where people can do little more than an Instagram or a tweet. So why have you decided that you are going to write these full-blown novels in this time? And I'm pushing here a little bit. So like, how effective do you feel they will be in this kind of environment?
Yeah, there's, without going into all the detail, but so much academic research around people who read fiction actually are more empathetic. Yeah, there's a lot of, I was actually teaching a class this morning on this, and we were going through the research on that from a university in Canada. And people who read non-fiction have a lot of information, but they don't necessarily have empathy. They have empathy, but they don't have as much empathy. People who read novels develop more empathy. Why is that? Because when you read a novel, you're seeing the world from someone else's point of view. You're inside someone else's head, right? So you start to see the world differently. Now, one of the things I do, is I teach AI in the future of work. And one thing I know about AI in the future of work is that if you want to survive in the future, you're going to have to be more human. Because the machines are going to do what machines are really good at, right? Better than humans. And what human skill do you need? You need empathy, right? You need resilience, right? So essentially the very human skills like empathy that we need to survive in the future and to make a human contribution, you can get from reading novels, right? So it's almost like a no-brainer, like why wouldn't you read the novel, right? And then of course then it comes down to, well, I get distracted, I can't read a book. Okay, no problem. Read for 5 minutes. You can read for 5 minutes, right? And then next day, set the timer, make it 6 minutes. By the end of the month, you've got 30 minutes on your timer, right? And suddenly, when you're immersed in a world, what happens is that trivial distraction, the frivolity of anger on social media, it just goes away. And you think, what was I doing? Yeah. But the more time you spend in that kind of anger-filled domain, it really kind of darkens your heart inside. So much of it's really going back to what I said about virtue earlier. Virtue is very much about what kind of person do I want to be, right? And it's really asking ourselves that existential question: what kind of person do I want to be? And if I want to be someone who has some clemency and magnanimity and is generous to others, I'm not going to get that by spending time on social media. I'm actually going to become impatient. I'm going to become aggressive. I'm just going to shout, right? So first of all, ask yourself that question, which most of us, we don't ask ourselves that question. Once you ask yourself that question, you'll realize art, novels, poetry, these have a role, right? They're not the only thing, of course. Yeah, some people do carpentry, some people do metal work, some people do stonework. But a craft is very, very important. Some people, like your husband, do calligraphy, right? And so calligraphy is also very important. So I think it's really down to asking yourself that question: what kind of person do you want to be? And then, and then books, can add a lot of value. Yes, who has the mic?
I think.
Oh yeah.
Rehan, you talked about Tolstoy's last book, What is Art? If you were supposed to write your last book, what would it be and why?
If I was writing my last book, okay. Whoa. Okay. Well, let me tell everyone here in the room, because I know a lot of you love coffee, but I can tell you something. Lamine is the coffee expert in the room. I know there's a lot of people here who think they know about coffee. This guy really knows about coffee, right? So if you know about coffee. I think, Lamine, if it was the last book I was going to write, I would write a book about coffee. Just to keep you happy. Just to keep you happy. And to keep our Yemeni friends over there who know a lot about mocha happy, to keep other friends who are coffee connoisseurs happy, I'd have to write a book about coffee.
Well, for those of you who don't know, Rehan is my uncle. I'm very proud of you about this book. So I have a question on behalf of Manal, who's a bit shy to ask. But it's a very basic question: that what really inspired you to become a writer? Because she's trying to be on this path as well as you.
Okay, great. So probably, a great question. So probably when I was about roughly your age, Manal, I was about 9, and you're 10, right? Yeah, so I was 9. And I was at primary school, I remember. And I had an American teacher, Mrs. Myers, lovely teacher. And she was part of an exchange program. She came over from Beverly Hills, California. So that's where they make all the movies, Hollywood, etc. So it's a very nice lady. And she really encouraged me to write. And I wrote this story. And I wrote this story about a friend of mine called Andrew, who's my best friend at school. And the story was basically about Andrew was at home, and his parents had left him and they'd gone somewhere. And I wrote the story and I kind of illustrated it. And what happens in the story, and of course, I'm 9 years old in 1980, okay? And Andrew's parents are away, and these burglars are trying to break into the house. So he's home alone. Okay, 1980. My teacher is Mrs. Myers from Beverly Hills, California. What film comes out just a couple of years later? Home Alone. Is that a coincidence? Yeah, it's a coincidence, guys. Of course it's a coincidence, right? So I was very kind of inspired by my teacher. Okay. Now, of course, what happens then is that you get older, and then you go to university, and you get drummed into the corporate arena, and all that artistic stuff is like, leave it at the door, Rehan, don't bring it to the office, right? We don't do that kind of soft, emotional kind of stuff in the corporate environment. It's very much dog eats dog, okay? So kind of I left all that. And then it was around 2000, I think it was about 2009, Faiza, I think it was. I think Faiza, myself, and the kids were having breakfast in our kitchen. And my daughter Iman, she's 21 now, but she was 6 back then. And at the time, I was the COO for a company, so reasonable senior executive role in a corporation. And I used to go to the office every day. And so my daughter, my 6-year-old at the time, Iman, she says to me, she says, "Abu," she said, "Daddy, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I'm like, okay, this is a really deep question, right? Like I go to the office, but as far as she's concerned, I'm not like a doctor, I'm not like a fireman, I'm just like this office guy. And so I thought to myself, it's a good point. What do I want to be? And then I went back in time, and I remembered Mrs. Myers, and I remembered the Home Alone book, and I thought, yes, actually, I wanted to be a writer. That's what I wanted to be. And so that really set me on the journey back in 2010 to do that. And 14 years later, we're 7 books into it. So I'm indebted to my daughter. I even said to her, Iman, why don't we write a book together? I'll write it, you put your name to it, and she's not interested.
So I think, Manal, the message there is copyright all of your early works, even if you're starting now. So I think we have another question here, and then I think we're nearly out of time, so I think maybe there's a couple of questions over this side as well, and then we can start to move downstairs.
Thank you, Rehan, for that. And yeah, good luck for anyone trying just to read 5 minutes of the book, because it's a page turner for sure. And I'm glad you mentioned Home Alone, because that was my question actually to you. Do you see any of your books being transformed into a movie, a series, something like that? Because when I'm reading it, it just feels like it could be. And also, I don't know if it's too early to ask, but is there a part 2?
Okay, this novel is standalone, okay? Because the next novel that I've done is finished, actually, inshallah. It's coming out in the summer, but it's like a fantasy series. It's not a bit different. As to a movie, if you remember earlier, I said, a friend of mine said to me, Rehan, you write all these books on the Ottomans, okay? Why don't you write a book about the Arabs? Well, he's actually a film producer. So I'm going to hold him to his promise now. I wrote that book you told me to write. Now you need to go and make the movie. So I'm hoping, Lamia, that it's in train. Okay? Yeah.
Where did you get the idea of the title of the book?
Excellent question. Wow. Right. So do you remember earlier I was describing all these different empires, and I said that there was the Roman Empire, right? Yeah. And I said that who's heard of the Romans? And everyone put their hands up, right? Everyone had heard of the Romans. But when I said the Seleucid, and I said that the Ptolemaic Empire, not many people put their hands up, did they? Not many people did. And so to me, it felt like those empires were like in a tomb. They were like buried. And what I was going to do as part of the story, I was going to uncover the tomb a little bit. And so hence I thought, let me call the book A Tomb of Empires. But what an excellent question. Thank you. Okay.
Do we have time for just one more?
I think
we do.
I think we're okay. I think we're 10 minutes until 5:30.
When you're researching your books, how much does the new history that you learn influence what you thought the plot was going to be? Does it affect or change it in any way?
Yeah, excellent question. So what I tend to do is that, because when I started writing, my teacher back in 2010, she said to me, Rehan, be very careful, don't get lost in the research. Like time boxing. Because otherwise you'll do research your entire life and you won't write the book. So by the time I'm into plot, I'm not doing any research. Yeah, I'm not, because I know I'll find something else, right? So you have to decide when is enough, right? And enough is enough once I've started the plot, yeah? Of course, if I've made some factual mistake, then of course I need to correct that for sure. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll write a historical note to say, hey, I changed the following, just for the purpose of the story. But yeah, my advice would be do the research, time box it, and then do the plot separately.
The referees have given us some extra time, so any more questions, and we can go up here. Perhaps?
Okay, right at the...
This is exercise for you.
Yes. Yeah, we'll take it as 5:30. Sure, till 5:30.
How long did it take you to make this story?
Oh, what a good question. Wow. I tell you what, the first time I wrote a book, it took me 4 years. It's probably half the time you've been alive, right? It took me 4 years. And then the second book took 18 months, 2 years. The third book took 18 months. The fourth book took 12 months. This one took a little bit longer. This took about 18 months. But normally, the books take about 12 months to 15 months to write. So it's quite an endeavor when you start writing.
So I'm really curious to hear about what the art
Can you repeat that?
I'm really curious to hear what the art of process means for you. So what I mean by that is, do you find that when you're writing a novel, are you different when you start out writing the novel versus when you finish? Do you find there's an inner journey for you when you write?
Yeah, of course, for sure. So there is a process, and I guess the one process at one level is the process of knowledge, of learning, and you have to be really open, right? You have to like consider, and what happens, the more that I read, the more I realize I actually don't know anything. Yeah, I really realize I don't know anything. Yeah, and that then creates a great sense of humility, because you think, wow, people have written such incredible works, and in their lifetime they wrote so much. I haven't written anything. So I think that inward journey is very important, and the more you then do that, the more willing you are to learn from other people as well. And then in terms of yes, there's a learning in terms of knowledge, but there's also a learning in terms of maybe I'm writing about certain things that I've seen in my life and I'm putting it into my story in some way. And maybe there's something didactic, something educational for me in the way the characters are being developed as well. So there's that. And then possibly that might also be helpful for other people who read the novel. So I think, yes, there's an outward a journey of learning, and there's definitely that inward process, that inward journey as well. Good question, thank you.
Okay. Any more?
I can probably just shout, I'm a teacher.
Okay.
I'm very curious about who did the illustrations, because these are some really good looking people out there.
Yeah. Seriously. There we go. And cats.
Yes, the cat is very majestic.
So I think speak to Manaz and Sadia, my publishers, later. They'll give you the details. But I think as far as I know, initially they were drawn artistically by hand, and then they were rendered with an AI tool, which I think is the way to go often these days. Yeah.
I think it's pretty much what you said about AI, that you need a human to define the characteristics and then feed it into AI to kind of give visuals to our brains.
Okay.
Lisa here has a
Oh, yeah, sure.
So I know as a person who never added characters for English class, most of them have very similar personalities. So how did you get over the problem of making all the characters very similar? And do you see yourself in any of the characters being wrote?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think who I see myself, and as I mentioned, was probably Pelagios, this guy who was like kind of middle manager, middle level king, and all the executives are giving him a lot of trouble. And I think I definitely relate to that. I think a lot of you relate to that as well. Now, in terms of how can you make the characters different? So this is really when you see the characters as like a cast, right? Like a movie. Like I've got this cast. Okay, this character I'm going to write about. Okay, this character and this character next to them. This character is someone who's going to antagonize this one, right? And how will they react to it? Or this character is always, someone who's very helpful for this character. So what you do, you build a cast of opposites quite often. You build the opposites. That way you make sure that a lot of the characters are not kind of monotone. They don't all sound the same. And as I said, when you're building your characters, you also have to think about what's the dramatic function. What purpose is this character performing? So as I was saying, I kind of start with the structure of the story. I then start with the dramatic function. Okay, is this an antagonist? Is it a protagonist? And then I'll work up the personality of the character. So a good example would be, dramatic function of someone like James Bond and Johnny English, right, is that they're super spies, right? To save England and, save the world, right? That's a dramatic function. But the personalities are very different, right? James Bond and Johnny English are very different personalities, but they have the same dramatic function. So you can have characters with the same dramatic function, but you could have very different personalities as well. Yeah, so definitely you should make sure some characters don't clash in that way, that they're the same, for sure.
I think there's another question. This.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Hi, maybe how long that book is?
How many pages is the book, yeah?
Yeah, page.
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So in terms of
to print.
To print?
Yeah.
How long did it take to print?
That it like 21 seconds, yeah.
How many seconds? Oh my goodness,
That's a great question.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great question.
Wait,
Okay.
I can, Jinsa, you want to answer that? So, Jinsa here is from the printing company.
Yes.
You want to answer that? How long will it take to print the book?
It took 4 to 5 hours to print, and the other process also, I mean, like max 2 days.
2 days, yeah. So it takes about 4 to 5 hours to print. And then you have this beautiful cover, and you can see some nice gold effect. So that takes about a day because you have to foil it and it has to dry, and then you do the embossing on it. But yeah, printing is very fast. No, so these are offset prints. So once you feed it in, it churns out like 1,000 at a time. So it just goes in one go. Yeah.
Thank you for answering that.
So we're cutting it fine time-wise now, but I think we do have a couple more questions just on this side.
So Gama teacher speak quite loud as well. I just wanted to know, for those young ones who would like to go into writing, what piece of advice would you give them about starting out on this journey?
Yeah, so starting up the journey for writing, I think it was the English novelist J.B. Priestley. I think he said that don't write with a view to getting published, but write like you would practice an instrument, something like that. And that's really what you have to do. If you want to write, we encourage our kids to learn the piano, and we're really excited that they get to grade 5 of piano, which is obviously a great achievement and so on. But in the same way, writing is a craft, right? It's a craft. So it's something that you have to do with practice. And as parents, what can we do? We can encourage our kids, right? So if you want your children to read, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, how many books am I reading? If you're not reading, why are the kids going to read, right? So I think that's also something that we have to think about. We have to think about in terms of encouraging our kids to read, creating the environment, okay, as well. So I think those are the things, and it is a craft. It's very much a craft.
We have another question.
Okay.
Last one. The lucky last one.
He's not a teacher. He's an IT guy.
So, Rehan, you have expertise in AI as well. Linking on to the question you just heard, if things are developing in a direction where AI is kind of infiltrating everything, including artwork for book covers, any input, any comments on AI and craft of actually producing a story?
Well, that's a good question. So the dean of my business school, Namrata, is here, Dr. Namrata. So she's, you just need to ask her about, she's actually sitting down here. So I'm actually doing a course on AI in the future of work. You can maybe ask her, you can attend that as well. So anyway, to answer your question, look, I think tools like AI are, and it's a tool, right? Ultimately, every job that's out there will have some aspect of it where you can augment it or you can automate it through the use of AI technology. So whether it's a radiologist using that at a hospital to scan things better, whether it's an economist using an AI tool to actually do a market survey quicker, whether it's an artist using an AI tool to render, right? So I think these technologies are here, and what we have to do is we can't say, well, it's going to take my job. I don't think it's going to take your job, but it's going to take some of the tasks that you do, and some of those tasks could be automated, or some of those tasks could be augmented. And then if we look at it from that perspective, then it's actually something that could help us, right? Rather than saying, oh, I'm going to be fearful. But what I would definitely recommend everyone to do is you must develop those human skills, right? Which I mentioned earlier. And so reading is a skill where you can develop empathy. The more you read, the more you understand other characters, you develop your sense of empathy. So to survive in the future of work, you need to be more human, because the machines will always be better machines.
So thank you so much, Rehan. Thank you everyone for your excellent questions. Now, before we go back downstairs, Rehan, is there any last words you'd like to give to our friends here tonight?
Yeah, well, I'd say, first of all, let's give Neil a huge round of applause. And also a huge round of applause to my publishers, Manaz and Sadia, because they've really done a fantastic job. The level of kind of attention to detail, they're really, artists and craftspeople, and may they have much more success in the region. I know they're getting success now. They may have much more success. So it's been a brilliant experience working with them, and big thanks to them. And of course, then a big thanks to the school as well, Suffolk British School, and the head teacher is here, I think somewhere. Yeah, head teacher is here. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who volunteered, and most of all, thank you to all of you for giving up your Saturday afternoon to coming and to listening to kind of two middle-aged guys have a conversation. Right?
Well, actually, Rehan, you mentioned that it's Zara Harrington. Thank you so much, Principal of Suffolk British School. We actually have a small token of our appreciation for Zara, if you'd like to come and accept a bunch of flowers to say thank you. I'm going to embarrass you. 40 up on stage.
Great. Thank you so much.
Really do appreciate it.
It's a fantastic space. Thank you so much for your hospitality.
I'm not normally one that stands on the stage, I have to be honest. I normally say that to the students, but I do think that things like this are really important to inspire the next generation. We've spoken quite a lot today about AI and what started it, and I think
Inspiring your minds is how it goes. I'm a teacher, I definitely don't need the mind.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. You'd like to take the flowers? We have for you a lovely bunch as well. I think that concludes everything upstairs. So thank you all for coming out this afternoon, and I hope you've enjoyed Rehan's words of wisdom and information. You can, oh yes, we've got one more slide which we mustn't forget.
Oh yes.
In fact, here it is. This is your QR code. If you want to buy the book before you get it signed, well, you need to buy it before you get it signed, but you can pay cash downstairs or you can use the QR code. And my advice to you all is, I'm sure you've got friends and family who might want a copy too, so don't be shy about buying 2, 3, 4, however many books you like. It's a unique opportunity to get it signed by Rehan here. You downstairs.